Hello guys, how is everyone doing? I hope you're all doing very well. Today we've brought you another new sequel in the Spider-Man series. It's Spider-Man Part 3. This movie was released in 2007. This film is the third sequel to the previous two Spider-Man films, made inspired by those two earlier installments, and built on the massive popularity Spider-Man kept gaining with each film. The huge popularity created among audiences, this sequel was made in 2007 based on that. So, without further delay, let's explain this movie, Spider-Man 3. Peter Parker's life at that time seemed to be going truly on the right track. College studies were going on, he had a steady income from photography work, and most importantly, his relationship with Mary Jane was also gradually deepening. On the other hand, his popularity as Spider-Man was sky high at that time. The people of the city no longer saw him just as a mysterious masked hero, but had started to love him as New York's true protector. His picture was on the streets, his news in the newspapers, and even ordinary people had begun to take pride in his work. In other words, Peter's life was at a point where, after all these years of hardship, it finally seemed like everything was starting to go his way. But the problem was, peace never lasted long in Peter's life. One evening, Peter goes to watch one of Mary Jane's stage performances. After the show ends, he also runs into Harry there. From the outside, their relationship might look normal, but deep inside, Harry still holds intense anger toward Peter. Because Harry still believes that Spider-Man is really responsible for his father Norman Osborn's death. And the most painful part is, he doesn't know that this same Spider-Man is his own childhood best friend, Peter Parker. When Peter goes to talk to Harry normally, like a friend, Harry insults him and pushes him away. This is very painful for Peter, because he has always considered Harry one of his closest friends. But there's no room for friendship in Harry's mind at that time. He has only one thing on his mind: revenge for his father's death. That same night, Harry goes to his father's old laboratory. Looking at the old research and chemicals lying there, a dangerous thought comes to his mind. He knows that the chemical his father used to give himself superhuman strength is what eventually turned him into the Green Goblin. Still, driven by his thirst for revenge, Harry chooses that same path. After applying that chemical to his own body, terrifying changes begin in his body too. His strength increases, his speed increases, and gradually he himself turns into a new goblin. In other words, now Peter doesn't just have an angry friend in front of him. He has an enemy standing against him who knows everything about him. Meanwhile, Peter still doesn't know how many dangers are building up around him at once. While spending time with Mary Jane in a quiet spot, away from the city's noise, unbeknownst to them, a small meteorite falls to Earth from the sky. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary piece of rock, but hidden inside it was actually a strange parasitic creature: Venom. Here's the thing. Venom is no ordinary creature. It's a being that can bond with another living body and use that body and its abilities. And unfortunately, that creature's eyes fall on Peter. When Peter and Mary Jane leave that place, Venom quietly clings to Peter's bike. Peter doesn't notice a thing. He goes back to his normal life, but unknown to him, a new danger has started following him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, another story begins with Flint Marko. He's a criminal who escapes from prison and returns to his own home. After a long time, he returns to his wife and family, but no welcome awaits him there. His wife gets furious the moment she sees him and makes it clear that because of Flint, their family's life is constantly at risk. But Flint doesn't see himself as a complete villain. He explains that there's a terrible reason behind his choice to walk the path of crime. His young daughter is critically ill, and her treatment requires a lot of money. It was to gather that money that he got involved in the world of crime. And this is where the story's most painful truth comes to light. Flint didn't intentionally kill Peter's Uncle Ben. Ben died in an incident that went wrong in the middle of a situation. But what Peter has believed all this time is that his uncle's killer was a ruthless criminal. So he has no idea that behind this man too lies the story of a helpless family. Usually we see a villain only as a bad person. But in Flint's case, it's not that simple. He committed a crime, but he's also a father desperate to save his sick daughter. And this conflict later makes the clash between Peter and Flint even more complicated. Meanwhile, a very beautiful moment comes into Peter's life. His Aunt May gives him an old ring. The ring isn't just a piece of jewelry. It carries the memory of Ben and May's relationship. May tells him that Ben once used this very ring to propose to her. Then she tells Peter that now is the time to use that same ring to tell Mary Jane how he feels. Peter is overjoyed hearing this. A new dream forms in his mind: marrying Mary Jane and starting a normal life. But the problem in Peter's life is that happy moments always seem to come right before trouble. While on his way to Mary Jane with the ring in hand, Harry suddenly attacks him. This time he's not the old Harry anymore. As the new Goblin, he's far more powerful, far more aggressive, and desperate for revenge. Peter repeatedly tries to make Harry understand there's no reason for them to be enemies. He doesn't want to fight his friend. But Harry is so blinded by his thirst for revenge that none of Peter's words reach him. In the end, Peter is forced to fight him. Rather than going head-to-head in a straight power struggle, Peter uses strategy and manages to defeat Harry. Harry is badly hurt and loses consciousness. Peter doesn't leave him behind as an enemy. Instead, in fear, he quickly rushes Harry to the hospital. This is where it becomes clear. No matter how much Harry hates him, to Peter, he's still his old friend. After treatment at the hospital, the doctors discover something strange. Harry's head injury is so severe that his memories of the past few years seem to have been erased. What a situation! The person who, just moments earlier, considered Peter his greatest enemy can no longer remember any of it. His father's death, his revenge against Spider-Man, his enmity with Peter, all of it seems wiped from his mind. Instead, opening his eyes and seeing Peter in front of him, Harry recognizes his old friend again, the one he once loved like a brother. From this point, it's clear a strange opportunity has opened up in Peter's life. The person who wanted to kill him has become his friend again. But Peter doesn't know how long this peace will last, because even though Harry's memory is gone, the real truths of his life haven't disappeared anywhere. And at the same time, two more big dangers are slowly closing in around Peter. On one side, Flint Marko, tied to the most painful event in Peter's past. And on the other, that strange Venom, which has already gotten very close to Peter. In other words, no matter how perfect Peter's life may look from the outside, inside, events are brewing around him that will very soon turn his entire life upside down again. Peter Parker's life at that time seemed to be moving along in perfect rhythm. College studies, photography work, and alongside all that, his relationship with Mary Jane put it all together. And I think, despite being so busy as Spider-Man, Peter was going through a beautiful phase of his life. The people of the city no longer looked at him with fear or suspicion like before. Instead, they had started seeing Spider-Man as their own hero. His picture on the streets, his news in the papers, even constantly on people's phone cameras. What a situation! But there was still one big problem in Peter's personal life, and that problem's name was Harry Osborn. One evening, while going to watch Mary Jane's stage performance, Peter runs into Harry. After the show ends, Peter naturally goes over to talk to his friend, but Harry doesn't want to acknowledge him at all, because there's only one idea in his head: that Spider-Man is responsible for his father Norman Osborn's death, and Harry firmly believes that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. So the space for friendship had already long since burned to ashes in the fire of revenge. Going home, Harry heads straight to his father's old secret laboratory. Looking at the old research and chemicals lying there, he realizes that the same experiment that once turned his father into the Green Goblin could give him extraordinary power too. And when revenge takes hold of the mind, a person often forgets the consequences for themselves. Harry does exactly that. Applying that dangerous chemical to his own body, he gradually turns into a new goblin, just like his father. Now Peter doesn't just have his old friend Harry in front of him. Another powerful enemy has appeared. Meanwhile, Peter and Mary Jane were spending time together in a quiet spot away from the city's noise. They had no idea that a small meteorite falling from the sky was about to change their lives so drastically. Hidden inside the meteorite was a strange parasitic creature named Venom. Arriving on Earth, it quietly attaches itself to Peter's bike. Peter doesn't realize anything, but the strange creature follows him all the way to his house. Here's the thing. Danger has now arrived right at Peter's doorstep, but he himself knows nothing about it. Meanwhile, on the other side, Flint Marko's story begins. After escaping from prison, instead of looking for a safe place, he goes straight back to his own home. But once there, he realizes no one is waiting for him. His wife is furious to see him and makes it clear that he should no longer stay at home because Flint's crimes and his life on the run have now put their family's life in danger too. Flint then tries to explain his situation. He says that the murder he's being blamed for wasn't something he did intentionally. His young daughter was suffering from a terrible illness at the time, and her treatment required a lot of money. It was in trying to raise that money that Flint got into the world of crime. But in a mistaken situation, that very incident ended up being the cause of Peter's Uncle Ben's death. The man Peter had been searching for all this time as his uncle's killer was actually trapped in his own guilt and helplessness. Right around this time, another beautiful moment comes into Peter's life. His Aunt May gives him an old ring and tells him that Ben once used this very ring to propose to her. Now she wants Peter to use that same ring to tell Mary Jane how he feels too. There's a mark of joy on Peter's face. In his mind, he perhaps starts to picture a beautiful future, proposing to Mary Jane, and both their lives moving one step forward. But this happy moment doesn't last long. On the way home, Harry suddenly attacks Peter, and this time he's not the old Harry. With the Goblin's new power, he wants to finish Peter off directly. Peter tries again and again to make him understand there's no reason for them to be enemies. But Harry, blinded by his thirst for revenge, refuses to listen to anything. In the end, Peter uses his intelligence and skill to defeat Harry. When Harry is seriously injured and loses consciousness, Peter doesn't leave him. Instead, he quickly takes him to the hospital. There, doctors examine him and find that due to the severe head injury, Harry has lost his memories of the past few years. And this event strangely turns the whole relationship around. Because Harry can no longer remember his father's death, his revenge against Spider-Man, or even his enmity with Peter. Instead, after losing his memory, he goes back to being the old Harry, who considered Peter his closest friend. Meanwhile, Flint Marko is on the run from the police. At one point, trying to evade the police, he ends up entering a place where ordinary people aren't allowed at all. A secret laboratory. An experimental device was running there at the time. Before Flint could understand what was happening, he gets caught in the device's test. Countless grains of sand enter his body, and the strangest transformation of his life begins. A little while later, when everything stops, Flint is no longer the same person. His body's very structure has changed. He can now turn his body into sand at will, and then return to his previous human form from that sand whenever he wants. In other words, an ordinary criminal has, in an instant, turned into such a powerful being that he's not easy to stop with any ordinary weapon. I think this is where Flint Marko's character truly becomes dangerous. Meanwhile, another event happens on the other side of the city. A huge crane goes out of control, putting Gwen Stacy in serious danger. Spider-Man arrives in time and rescues her, and a new photographer named Eddie Brock captures photos of this entire event. Eddie wants to establish himself as the Daily Bugle's new photographer. As a result, an odd rivalry begins between Peter and Eddie. The paper's editor, J. Jonah Jameson, throws down a challenge in front of both of them. Whoever can bring in a photo of Spider-Man doing something bad first will get the job. It sounds simple enough, but the situation gradually gets harder for Peter. Because Eddie isn't just a rival, he's standing in Peter's way at his workplace, too. Meanwhile, disappointment also comes into Mary Jane's life. She loses her theater job, and right in the middle of that heartbreak, the city organizes a huge event to honor Spider-Man. Seeing the crowd's excitement around Spider-Man there, it's clear how popular he has become in the city. But right in the middle of the event, something happens that deeply hurts Mary Jane. At the crowd's request, Spider-Man kisses Gwen. From the outside, the moment might look romantic, but in Mary Jane's eyes, it's something else entirely. Seeing the person she loves with someone else like that creates a pain inside her that she doesn't show, but it's clearly there. And Peter still doesn't realize how big a crack this small incident has created in their relationship. Then one day, during a bank robbery, Flint Marko shows up in front of Spider-Man again. This time, the fight isn't with any ordinary criminal. As the Sandman, Flint can turn his body into a massive form, absorb blows, and then spread his body out again. No matter how hard Peter tries, he can't stop him completely in the end. Flint escapes, and Peter realizes beating this enemy won't be easy. In the evening, Peter plans to take Mary Jane to an expensive restaurant. His purpose is one thing: to propose to Mary Jane with the old ring Aunt May gave him. Peter is perhaps thinking that, after all this trouble, their relationship will finally reach a beautiful place. But right then, everything flips upside down. Gwen shows up there and brings up that famous photo of her kiss with Spider-Man. It feels even more humiliating to Mary Jane. She leaves in anger and hurt. Peter sits there with the ring in his hand, and his whole planned proposal falls apart in an instant. Then comes one of the biggest shocks of Peter's life. Called to the police station, he learns that the real story of his Uncle Ben's murder isn't what he'd believed all this time. The person involved in the murder is still alive, and the police show him a photo. The moment he sees the photo, Peter's eyes lock onto it, because he recognizes the man. It's Flint Marko. After learning the truth about his uncle's death, the anger built up inside Peter explodes completely. And right at that moment, that mysterious parasite, Venom, enters his life. At night, after Peter falls asleep, the creature slowly merges with his body. At first, Peter doesn't realize anything at all, but gradually his costume changes. An abnormal strength is born in his body, and changes begin in his personality too. The black suit didn't just cover Peter's body. It seemed to start bringing out his inner dark side as well. Peter, who had until then fought against injustice, now becomes consumed by thoughts of revenge. There's only one name on his mind now: Flint Marko. Eventually, Peter finds Flint. A terrifying fight breaks out between them inside the city's metro tunnel. This time Peter isn't like before. Under Venom's influence, his strength has increased, but so has his brutality. He no longer just wants to stop the criminal. He wants to finish him off. At one point in the fight, Peter throws Flint into water and breaks a pipe, flooding him in such a way that it seems there's no chance of him surviving. Peter assumes that he has finally avenged his uncle's death. But here's the thing. The revenge he thought of as his own justice was gradually turning him into someone he himself might once have hated. Meanwhile, Harry's lost memory slowly starts to come back. His father's death, his enmity with Peter, all of it comes back to his mind. As a result, he returns to the path of revenge. But this time, he doesn't attack Peter directly. Instead, he comes up with an even more ruthless plan. Harry's goal was to break Peter down, not physically, but mentally. He threatens Mary Jane and forces her to end her relationship with Peter. Peter has no idea why Mary Jane is acting this way. As a result, he assumes Mary Jane may have fallen for someone else, and that person is Harry. This misunderstanding deepens the pain inside Peter even further. And right at that moment, Venom's dark influence over Peter starts growing even deeper. Love, friendship, and revenge, all mixed together. Peter's life reaches a point where he's no longer the same old Peter Parker. Waiting ahead of him now is an even bigger clash, where he'll have to face not just outside enemies, but the darkness within himself too. Under Venom's influence, Peter slowly begins to lose his true self. Driven by anger and the fire of revenge, Peter now shows up directly at Harry's house. A fierce fight breaks out between them. No matter how much Harry tries to resist, thanks to the extra power Venom gives him, Peter eventually corners him. He even throws a bomb and seriously injures Harry. Here's the thing. Peter isn't fighting just as Spider-Man anymore. The combination of his inner rage and Venom's influence is making him increasingly aggressive. Meanwhile, Eddie Brock was also looking for a chance to take revenge on Peter. He fabricates a fake photo to make Spider-Man look bad and publishes it in the newspaper. But Peter catches the manipulation in the photo and exposes the truth. As a result, Eddie loses his job. This is where his resentment grows even further. I think, for Eddie, it wasn't just about losing a job. He starts believing that Peter Parker is responsible for one problem after another in his life. Meanwhile, Venom's influence starts showing up terrifyingly in Peter's behavior too. Peter, who never used to get into trouble with anyone without reason, now loses his temper over the smallest things. When angry, he starts losing control over his own behavior. Even one day, a minor dispute at a restaurant spirals so out of control that Peter accidentally shoves Mary Jane and knocks her down. After it happens, for a moment, he seems to come to his senses. Looking at himself, he realizes this isn't who he is. Venom has taken him to a place where he's even started hurting the person he loves. This realization forces Peter into a difficult decision. He understands that as long as this black suit is on his body, he won't be able to control himself. So, to save himself and return to his old self, he goes to a secluded church. There, he desperately tries to separate Venom from his body. Right then, the church's huge bell rings out. The intense sound severely weakens Venom. It becomes clear then that this parasite has one specific weakness: loud, intense sound. Peter takes the opportunity and, with great effort, manages to separate Venom from his own body. It seems he has finally regained control of himself, but it doesn't end there. Standing below the church at the time was Eddie Brock. When Venom leaves Peter's body, it goes directly and bonds with Eddie's body, and this bond gives birth to an even more terrifying enemy: Venom. Where Peter found freedom from his inner darkness, Eddie embraces that very darkness as his own power. Now Eddie has one single goal: to destroy Peter Parker. But he also knows fighting Peter alone won't be easy to win, so he finds someone who also holds deep resentment against Spider-Man. That's Flint Marko, that is, Sandman. Their purposes become one. One wants to destroy Peter for personal revenge. The other wants to settle the score for his own crimes. In the end, they join forces and decide to finish off Spider-Man together. But defeating Peter takes more than just strength. He has a weakness, and that weakness's name is Mary Jane. Eddie knows this very well. So instead of attacking Peter directly, he kidnaps Mary Jane. Hanging her in a web on the side of a huge tall building in the city, Eddie challenges Spider-Man. In other words, this fight is no longer just between two superpowered beings. The life of the person dearest to Peter is tied up in it too. Realizing Mary Jane is in danger, Peter rushes to Harry for help. But because of everything that's happened, Harry is still angry with Peter. So at first, he refuses to help. Peter prepares to go into this battle almost alone. But right then, a truth comes into Harry's life that shatters the entire foundation of his hatred. An old employee of Harry's father tells him the truth. Norman Osborn's death wasn't caused by Spider-Man. Rather, he died from being struck by his own glider. The man Harry has hated for so long as his father's killer is actually innocent. Devastatingly, after learning this truth, Harry realizes that in the name of revenge, he has hurt his closest friend for years. After this realization, Harry doesn't just sit there. He takes his glider and rushes straight to help Peter. And that's exactly when the real battle begins. Peter fights alone against Eddie and Flint. Handling both of their powers at once becomes extremely difficult for him. Sandman is attacking with his massive sand body, and Venom knows every one of Peter's weaknesses. As a result, Peter is gradually cornered. What a situation. Two enemies on one side, Mary Jane's life at risk on the other, and no one around to help Peter. Right at that moment, Harry's glider comes flying in from the sky. This time, Harry is no longer the old vengeful person. He stands beside Peter and jumps straight into the fight. His arrival completely changes the shape of the battle. Peter gets a fresh chance to fight, and together they start pushing back against Eddie and Sandman. But Eddie still isn't finished. Seizing an opening, he attacks Peter in such a way that it seems Peter's end has truly arrived. And right at that moment, Harry steps in front of his friend, risking his own life. Taking the blow onto his own body, he saves Peter. This sacrifice by his friend reignites all the rage inside Peter. But this time, that rage isn't for revenge, it's to save his friend. He realizes the only way to defeat Venom is to exploit its weakness. Peter takes an iron rod and starts creating an intense sound. The sound weakens Venom, and it gradually starts separating from Eddie's body. Seizing the chance, Peter throws a bomb taken from Harry's glider at Venom. But Eddie still refuses to let go of Venom. Afraid of losing his power, he tries once again to merge with Venom, and that decision becomes his final one. In the explosion, both Venom and Eddie are destroyed. In the end, Peter and Harry together manage to save Mary Jane. But there's a heavy price behind this victory for Peter. He realizes just how much he'd changed while walking the path of revenge. And Harry proves with his own life that, despite all the years of misunderstanding, their friendship hadn't completely ended after all. Rather, in that final moment, that very friendship brings them back together. Even after the battle ends, the story's most emotional moment was still to come. All around, there's wreckage, Venom, and Eddie's end, Harry fighting for his life. In the middle of this chaos, Flint Marko slowly comes forward to Peter. But this time, he doesn't come as an enemy. In his eyes, there's only exhaustion and years of guilt he's been carrying. In a calm voice, Flint tells Peter the real truth of that whole event. What Peter had believed all this time to be a planned murder wasn't actually like that. That night, he never intended to kill Uncle Ben at all. During the robbery, a gun accidentally went off in his partner's hand, and it was in that accident that Ben Parker died. Flint admits that the choice to go down the path of crime was his own, but Ben's death was never part of his plan. He then also opens up about the most painful reason in his life. His little daughter is suffering from a terminal illness, and to raise money for her treatment, he was forced into crime. In other words, the man Peter had seen only as a murderer all this time is actually a helpless father, desperate to save his own child's life. It becomes clear now that the man standing in front of Peter is no longer a villain. He's someone who has suffered the punishment for his mistake within himself for years. And this is where Peter's character shows its biggest change. Just a while earlier, under Venom's influence, he had wanted to kill Flint out of revenge. But now he understands that justice and revenge are not the same thing. The lesson Uncle Ben taught him as a child, that with power comes responsibility, seems to come back to his mind again. In the end, Peter forgives Flint. This forgiveness isn't just given to Flint. It's also a farewell to the years of anger built up inside himself. Flint looks at Peter once with gratitude in his eyes, then slowly turns his body into sand. In an instant, he becomes a huge sandstorm and disappears into the sky. No one knows where he went, but his story ends right there. Meanwhile, Peter and Mary Jane rush to Harry. Harry is critically injured by now. The wound he took while saving his friend can no longer be treated. Peter sits beside him and, in a broken voice, asks for forgiveness. Because he knows that through all the misunderstandings, anger, and revenge, he hurt Harry many times over. Harry smiles faintly and says just one thing to him: "You were always my best friend." In that one small sentence, all the distance built up between them over the years seems to disappear. There are no complaints left, no revenge, just a final farewell between two friends. Then Harry slowly closes his eyes and, holding Peter's hand, says goodbye to the world. The next day, Peter and Mary Jane attend his funeral. All around is the silence of grief, and in both their minds seems to weigh all the misunderstandings of the past few months. They realize that it was the fear of losing each other that had pushed them so far apart. In this final moment, there's no big speech, no dramatic promise. Just silently holding each other, they decide to start over again. This is how this chapter of the Spider-Man trilogy ends. It's not just the story of a superhero, but a story of forgiveness, friendship, love, and returning from the darkness of revenge into the light. And the strangest thing is, in the end, Peter's greatest victory wasn't won by defeating an enemy, but by conquering the darkness within himself. Friends, so far we've given you a brief explanation of this movie. Now we'll talk about some of this movie's hidden twists. I hope you'll enjoy this a lot. So let's start with the movie's hidden twists. Twist number 1. Uncle Ben's real killer was actually someone else in the previous sequel. Audiences learned that another convicted man had killed Ben. But that's actually not the case. Here we see that the real killer was Flint Marko, someone nobody suspected was capable of murder. He had actually been roaming around freely all this time. And when this tip reaches Peter, he becomes overwhelmed with fury. And in that fury, his mind goes into a rage. Ever since the previous movie, Peter had always carried guilt and anger inside himself over one thing: the death of his beloved Uncle Ben. Until now, he believed a specific criminal had shot and killed Ben. Peter's fire of revenge burned around that man. But in this movie, that entire event comes to light in a completely different way. Here's the thing: the man Peter had believed all this time to be his Uncle Ben's killer actually didn't know the full truth. Later, when the police tell Peter that the person actually involved in Ben Parker's murder is someone else, and that he's still alive, Flint Marko's photo is shown to him. The moment he sees the photo, Peter understands. This is the man involved in that night's event. And this is where the resentment buried inside Peter all this time flares up again. The most serious part is, Flint is still alive and moving around freely. In other words, the man Peter has held responsible for his uncle's death all this time has been living a normal life right in front of his eyes. For Peter, this wasn't just an ordinary crime. Uncle Ben's death is one of the deepest wounds of his life. And suddenly, coming face to face with the person tied to that wound awakens the vengeful Peter Parker inside him even more than Spider-Man. From here, it becomes clear why Peter starts changing so much after seeing Flint. To him, Flint isn't just a criminal anymore. He's someone Peter believes has taken away the most important person from his family. And this very anger later pushes Peter toward even darker decisions. But strangely, the real truth in the end isn't exactly what the audience assumes at first. Flint really was involved in Ben's death, but he didn't kill Ben on purpose. The event was far more complicated and was essentially the result of an accident. In other words, behind the story of the man Peter had been chasing down for revenge as a cold-blooded killer, there was another reality entirely. This is exactly why this twist is so important to the movie. Because it doesn't just answer the mystery of who killed Ben, it completely transforms Peter's mindset about revenge. At first he hates Flint and wants to finish him off, but later, once he learns the full truth, he has to make the difficult decision to forgive him. And that's where Peter realizes not every crime has to be answered with revenge. Twist number 2. Harry's amnesia was actually just a temporary truce. At one point, we see Harry's amnesia begin. But that amnesia was really just a temporary truce, nothing more. When he suffers the head injury, Harry forgets about revenge and becomes friends with Peter again. He forgets everything from before, but this was never actually a solution to anything. Whenever his memory comes back to him, when he regains it, the fire of revenge burns in his mind again. His mind fills with rage, and he goes after Peter for revenge once more. After Harry loses his memory of the past several years from the blow to his head, the situation suddenly changes completely. The person who, moments earlier, was desperate for revenge, believing Peter responsible for his father's death, now accepts Peter again as his closest friend. As comforting as this might sound, it's just as strange. Because the anger and desire for revenge inside Harry hadn't truly ended. It had only been temporarily buried, along with his memory. Here's the thing. With Harry's memory gone, the old conflict between him and Peter pauses for a while, but the root cause of the problem hasn't gone anywhere. Peter also didn't know how fragile this peace was. When Harry starts spending time with Peter again like a friend, it seems like everything might finally be okay. But as his memory slowly returns, his father's death, his hatred for Spider-Man, and his built-up resentment against Peter come back too. In other words, Harry's amnesia was never a permanent solution. It was more like a temporary pause, during which the two friends' relationship went back to how it used to be. But the real conflict between them was still alive. And once the memory returns, that old fire of revenge ignites once again. It's quite strange. A blow to the head can bring back their friendship, but it can't make that friendship permanent. In the end, Harry has to face the same question again. Is Peter really responsible for his father's death? Twist number 3. Venom specifically attacks during moments of weakness about that parasitic creature we were talking about, the one merging with Peter's body. At that time, he was full of resentment, and the obsession with revenge kept circling in his head alone. This is a major twist. Venom actually feeds off anger and negativity, feeds off it, always gets its way, creates problems. It wasn't at all a coincidence when Venom entered Peter's body. Peter was in an extremely mentally weak state at that time. After learning the real truth about Uncle Ben's death, the fire of revenge had reignited inside him. Problems had arisen in his relationship with Mary Jane, and his conflict with Harry had reached its peak too. Altogether, Peter was in such a state that it had become difficult for him to control his own anger and emotions. Here's the thing. Venom isn't just a powerful parasite. It multiplies the negative emotions already present inside Peter several times over. When Peter was in his normal state, he used his power to help people. But after Venom entered his body, that very same power gradually turned into a tool for anger, arrogance, and revenge. As the suit turns black, it's not just his appearance that changes. His behavior starts changing strangely too. Normally, Peter would think before doing certain things, but under Venom's influence, he has no hesitation about any of it. Getting angry at the drop of a hat, insulting people, getting into fights without reason. All of it shows that Venom is turning his weaknesses into its own power. Here's the thing. Venom didn't turn Peter into a bad person from scratch. Rather, it drew out the anger and desire for revenge already hidden inside him. And this is the most important aspect of this twist. Venom seems to understand that the easiest way to control a person isn't through their body, but through their weak mind. Right when Peter was losing most to his own emotions, Venom chose him as the perfect host for itself. As a result, the black suit that Peter initially thought of as an incredible new power gradually turns into the biggest danger of his life. Twist number 4. Harry was the real reason behind Mary Jane's breakup. Peter had actually thought that Mary Jane had really left him and started falling for Harry. But that's not how it was. It's a bit different. We need to think about this. Harry had actually threatened her and forced her to lie in order to figure out how to break Peter down mentally, how to weaken him emotionally. When Peter suddenly sees Mary Jane's behavior change, it seems completely clear to him that Mary Jane may no longer love him and instead has developed new feelings for Harry. But the real truth was completely different. Mary Jane didn't leave Peter of her own will. Harry had put her in a situation where she had no choice but to push away the person she loved. Harry was still firmly set on his plan to take revenge on Peter. He knew that simply defeating Peter physically wouldn't be enough. To truly break Peter, he had to take away the person closest to him, and that's exactly why he targets Mary Jane. By threatening her and putting her under pressure, Harry forces her to pretend to end her relationship with Peter. Here's the thing. From the outside, Peter only saw a breakup, but he had no idea there was a big conspiracy working behind it. Mary Jane also hides her own pain and creates a lie in front of Peter that makes him believe she's fallen for someone else. Even the incidents where she's seen with Harry further reinforce Peter's wrong assumption. As a result, when Peter sees Mary Jane getting closer to Harry, his inner insecurity and pain grow even more. Here's the thing. This emotional wound is exactly what later pushes him further toward Venom's influence. Because at that point, Peter was carrying all at once the pain of losing love, anger toward Harry, and the desire for revenge for Uncle Ben's death. The most serious part is, Mary Jane never actually wanted to leave Peter. She was only forced into that decision because of Harry's threat. In other words, a large part of the belief with which Peter was sinking deeper into Venom's darkness was actually the result of a misunderstanding. And when the truth finally comes out, it becomes clear. This whole time, Mary Jane wasn't trying to leave Peter, but was hiding her love in order to protect him. Twist number 5. Eddie Brock's fraud gets caught by Peter. Nobody had been able to catch on to the fraud Eddie Brock was pulling. But Peter catches it. Exactly right. To save himself, he was actually creating fake photos of Spider-Man committing crimes and trying to frame him in various ways. But eventually the real truth comes out. And after it comes out, his work, his job, everything is taken away, and this humiliates him. And after being humiliated, he's later handed over into Venom's grasp. From the very start, Eddie Brock was trying to build his career as Peter's rival by photographing Spider-Man. But the problem was, unlike Peter, he had no real insight into Spider-Man's movements. So, to strengthen his position, Eddie resorts to a major act of fraud. He manipulates a photo to make Spider-Man look bad, presenting it in such a way that it seems Spider-Man himself is involved in some crime. Here's the thing. Eddie thought that once this photo was published, everyone would see him as a brilliant journalist, and Peter would be completely cornered. But Peter examines the photo carefully and realizes it's been manipulated. He proves that Eddie didn't actually take a real photo, but fabricated false evidence instead. As a result, the trap Eddie had set for Peter ends up destroying his own career instead. Upon learning the truth, Editor Jameson fires Eddie on the spot. In an instant, Eddie's respect, his job, and his dreams for the future, all of it falls apart. And this humiliation creates intense hatred toward Peter in his mind. I think this is where Eddie's character truly starts to take a turn. Because before this, he was just competing with Peter. But after losing his job, it's no longer limited to competition. An intense desire for revenge is born inside him. He starts believing Peter is responsible for everything falling apart in his life. And it's exactly at this weak moment that Venom comes to him. When Peter separates the parasite from his own body at the church, it lands on Eddie's body below and wraps around him. As a result, Eddie's own anger, humiliation, and desire for revenge merge together with Venom's dark power. This is how a failed rival gradually turns into one of Spider-Man's most terrifying enemies. The strangest part is, Peter never directly attacked Eddie on the path to becoming Venom. Eddie lost his job because of his own fraud, but in the end, he places the blame for that humiliation on Peter too. In other words, instead of accepting the consequences of his own mistake, he chooses revenge instead. And that very decision is what finally hands him over to Venom. Twist number 6. Spider-Man himself nearly became a killer. He'd become extremely aggressive and couldn't hold back. He was beating him. After putting on the black suit, he genuinely tries to kill Flint, something never seen in any previous film. This change shows that Venom isn't something ordinary. It's an extremely powerful force, and as a result of it, the conscience, that basic human moral sense, actually gets destroyed. The black suit didn't just make Peter more powerful than before, it also gradually weakened the boundaries of his thinking and morality. No matter how angry Peter got in his normal state, he would never decide to intentionally kill someone using his powers. Because the most important thing about being Spider-Man was, having power doesn't mean having the right to use it however you please. But in Flint Marco's case, the situation becomes completely different. After learning about Marco's connection to Uncle Ben's death, the old resentment inside Peter reignites. And by then, Venom's influence is also working on his body. As a result, his desire for revenge gradually exceeds the boundaries of justice. When Peter faces Flint in the metro tunnel, his behavior makes it clear he's no longer the same Spider-Man. The fight wasn't just to stop a criminal. Peter's intent was to punish him, even to kill him if necessary. With Venom's power, he strikes Flint brutally, eventually throws him into water, and believes Flint is dead. Here's the thing. Peter had, by this point, nearly forgotten his most important principle. Until now, he stopped criminals, but never took the final right of judgment into his own hands. This time, that line starts to break. Anger convinces him that avenging Uncle Ben's death is his own justice. And this change is exactly what reveals Venom's true terrifying side. Venom doesn't just increase Peter's physical strength. It causes an even bigger change in his mindset. The person who once tried to save even his enemies now feels no remorse at an enemy's death. Here's the thing. Venom never directly told Peter he had to become a killer. Rather, it amplified the anger, revenge, and pride already inside him so much that Peter himself moved toward that decision. The most serious part is, Peter still didn't think of himself as a bad person at that point. To him, he was simply punishing his Uncle Ben's killer. But it becomes clear to the viewer. The fine line Peter always understood between justice and revenge, he's now losing under Venom's influence. This is exactly why Peter, during the Black Suit period, feels so strange. He's far more powerful than before, far more confident, but at the same time, far more ruthless. And finally, after accidentally shoving Mary Jane, when Peter sees his own behavior and becomes frightened himself, he starts to realize the problem isn't only in the suit. Something inside him is also changing terrifyingly. Twist to number 7. Venom's only weakness was hidden in the sound of the church. Bell, there's no other way to weaken Venom. The only method is the sound of the church bell. Because throughout the movie we see that no matter what power Peter gains, he can never defeat Venom with it. But coincidentally, when intense sounds are created around it, this Venom parasite becomes considerably weak. And once this is discovered, the outcome of the battle changes drastically. When Peter first starts changing under Venom's influence, he himself doesn't realize how difficult it will be to separate this parasite from his body. Venom had increased Peter's strength even further. His reflexes, speed, and attacking ability had also become far more terrifying. As a result, Peter couldn't defeat this parasite using only his own Spider-Man powers. In fact, the more he fought Venom, the more it seemed the situation was slipping out of his control. But a strange thing happens here. Realizing his own inner darkness, Peter finally goes to a church and tries to force Venom out of his body. Right then, the church's huge bell suddenly rings. In that intensely piercing sound, Venom becomes abnormally weak and starts separating from Peter's body. Here's the thing. Until then, Peter had believed that defeating Venom would require fighting it with his own power. But by chance, he discovers that Venom's real weakness isn't strength, it's intense sound. With every strike of the bell, the parasite suffers, and Peter realizes this very sound can free him from Venom's grip. The critical part is, if Peter hadn't gone to the church at that moment, he might never have learned this weakness of Venom's. In other words, in the end, defeating this parasite, which seemed almost unstoppable throughout the movie, didn't require any special weapon or extraordinary technology. The intense sound of an ordinary church bell became its greatest weakness. But the story gets even stranger here. When Peter finally manages to separate Venom from his own body, he couldn't have imagined that this parasite would be lost so easily. Because standing below at that time was Eddie Brock, and Venom, leaving Peter's body, bonds directly with Eddie's body instead. So right where Peter escapes Venom's dark influence, an even more terrifying enemy is born. Here's the thing. The very bell sound that was Peter's path to freedom ends up opening the door to a new danger for him instead. Twist number 8. Venom separates and gives birth to a new enemy after. Moving away from Peter's body, Venom goes directly into Eddie Brock's body, where we see that Peter was already very angry. And this is exactly how a single parasite creates an entirely new and terrifying villain. After separating Venom from Peter's body, it seemed like finally everything was over. Peter had returned to his normal state, and this terrifying parasite might no longer be able to cause danger either. But here's the thing. Defeating Venom doesn't mean the end of its existence. Even after leaving Peter's body, the parasite was still alive. It just needed a new host. And Eddie Brock gets exactly that chance. By then, Eddie was already extremely furious with Peter. After his own deception was exposed, he'd lost his job, his reputation was ruined, his career destroyed, and he held Peter responsible for all of it. As a result, the anger and desire for revenge already burning inside Eddie make him exactly the person Venom could bond with most effectively. Here's the thing. By expelling Venom from his own body, Peter had actually created a new danger. When Venom merges with Eddie's body, it's not just a union of a parasite and a person. The negative emotions of both merge together too. Eddie's desire for revenge and Venom's violent instincts combine to create a completely new enemy. After this, Eddie is no longer the ordinary photographer he was before. His body shape changes, his strength increases, and most importantly, he now knows a lot about Spider-Man's powers too, because Venom had spent some time in Peter's body. As a result, the information Venom holds about Peter's abilities, weaknesses, and even his identity becomes useful to Eddie. The extraordinary part is, Venom starts using Peter's greatest strength against him. Peter had thought that once free of Venom, he could go back to his old life. But that very freedom ends up making Eddie even more dangerous. Now, standing before him is an enemy who isn't just powerful, but who also knows about his personal life and his weaknesses. And this is exactly why, when Eddie Brock becomes Venom, it's not just the arrival of a new villain. A terrifying reflection of Peter's own dark side seems to stand before him too. The anger, pride, and revenge Peter had briefly been drowning in Eddie Venom takes that same darkness to an even more extreme level. As a result, the parasite that had transformed one man ends up merging with another to create an enemy who becomes just as dangerous for Peter. Twist number 9. The truth about Harry's father's death comes from the most unexpected source: Harry's entire revenge. Story was actually built on a false belief. He believed that Spider-Man, that is, Peter Parker, was responsible for his father, Norman Osborn's death. This belief was so deeply rooted that even though Peter tried many times to explain the truth to him, Harry could never accept it. To him, every word from Peter was seen as an attempt to hide his own crime behind their friendship. Here's the thing: Harry was so blinded by revenge that even when the chance to learn the truth was there, he didn't want to see it. His friendship with Peter, their childhood memories, the resentment over his father's death had built a wall over all of it. So no matter how much Peter said he didn't kill Norman, Harry instead believed even more that Peter was deceiving him. But in the end, this years-long false belief is shattered by someone Harry never even considered a witness to the incident. An old employee at his father's house tells him the whole truth. He had witnessed Norman's final moments with his own eyes and understood that Norman's death wasn't actually caused by Spider-Man. The real event was even more tragic. When Norman was fighting Spider-Man, he tried to attack Peter with his own glider. Peter dodged the attack at the last moment, and the glider came back and struck Norman himself. In other words, his own weapon ultimately caused his death. The devastating part is, the man Harry had hated all this time as his father's killer, that Peter, never actually killed Norman. Rather, Norman fell victim to his own attack. And this truth reaches Harry not from Peter's own mouth, but from an ordinary man who had no personal stake in the matter at all. After learning the truth, Harry's entire world seems to shake. He realizes that the revenge he'd been chasing all this time was based on a false belief. His hatred toward Peter had no basis at all. So the person he saw as his greatest enemy comes back, in the final moment, to being his closest friend again. This twist matters even more because Harry's transformation doesn't happen through any magic or miracle. Once he learns the truth, he realizes his own mistake himself. And that's when it becomes clear how blind revenge can make a person. Sometimes the truth is right in front of our eyes, but out of anger, we simply refuse to see it. Twist 10. The one he hated and tried to kill ends up saving his life in the end. Harry's whole journey is like a strange story of contradiction. The person he once considered his closest friend, after his father's death, he turns into his greatest enemy. Consumed by revenge, Harry attacks Peter again and again, tries to destroy his life, even uses Mary Jane to break Peter down mentally. In other words, destroying Peter seems to become the sole purpose of his life. But toward the end, when Harry learns that Peter wasn't actually responsible for his father's death, all his years-long false beliefs collapse before his eyes. He realizes that the person he hated for so many years wasn't actually his enemy at all. Rather, it was his own anger and desire for revenge that pushed away his closest friend. Then comes the moment where Harry's character shows its biggest change. When Peter is fighting Flint, Marco, and Venom at the same time, the situation slips beyond his control. On one side, Sandman's massive power. On the other, Venom's brutal attacks. Fighting both alone, Peter is nearly defeated. Right then, Harry arrives. The person who once wanted to finish Peter off now stands beside him instead. Together they start fighting the enemies. And at one point in the battle, when Eddie Brock is about to kill Peter, Harry, without a moment's hesitation, risks his own life and steps in front of Peter. The blow lands on Harry's body in the end. This is where the biggest change in their relationship happens. The person who once wanted to kill Peter out of revenge is the same person who, in the final moment, gives his own life to save him. Harry proves that their friendship was never actually completely over. It had just been hidden beneath the anger and misunderstanding all this time. And Harry's sacrifice changes Peter from within, too. Watching his friend die before his eyes brings the old Peter back again. Not revenge, but the desire to save his friend becomes the most important thing to him now. The most emotional part is, before he dies, Harry forgives Peter and lets him know that in the end, their friendship was what mattered most to him. And Peter also realizes just how meaningless all that enmity had truly been. In other words, Harry's story began with hatred toward Peter, but ends with him sacrificing his own life for Peter. Going from a vengeful enemy back to being that old friend, and saving Peter's life with his own. This reversal is one of Spider-Man 3's most powerful emotional twists. Twist number 11. In the second fight with Flint Marko, Peter lets him go, knowing everything. The first time Peter faced Flint Marko, there was only one thought in his head: revenge for Uncle Ben's death. At that time, Peter didn't know how the whole event had actually happened. To him, Flint was simply a murderer who had taken his beloved uncle's life. On top of that, Venom's influence had multiplied Peter's anger and desire for revenge several times over. As a result, during the fight, Peter wasn't behaving like a hero anymore. He was acting like someone taking justice into his own hands. In that fight in the metro, Peter beats Flint so mercilessly that he eventually throws him into the water and believes he has finally avenged Uncle Ben's death. But here's the thing. Peter still didn't know the truth at that point. Later, when Flint himself comes before Peter and reveals the real events of that night, everything changes completely. Flint tells him he never intended to kill Ben. In the middle of the situation, a gun accidentally went off in his accomplice's hand, and that bullet took Ben's life. Flint had gotten into crime to raise money for his daughter's treatment. Now here comes the real twist. Peter could have chosen to attack Flint again, because standing in front of him was the man connected to his uncle's death. But this time, Peter is no longer like before. There's no black suit influence, no thirst for revenge. Having learned the truth, he understands that although Flint is a criminal, he never intended to kill Ben. I think this is where Peter's true character comes through most clearly. An ordinary person might want to punish the criminal responsible for a loved one's death. But Peter understands that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. He forgives Flint and gives him the chance to leave. Here's the thing. The first time, Peter saw Flint as a murderer, and so wanted to finish him off. And the second time, seeing the same man, he listens to his whole story and decides to forgive him. The difference between these two moments shows just how much Venom had changed Peter. In the end, Flint turns his body to sand and drifts away with the wind. Peter doesn't stop him either, because this time, there's no revenge in his mind, but rather the capacity to accept the truth. And this proves, no matter how powerful the black suit made Peter, once it's removed, the Peter who returns finds his greatest strength isn't his power, but his capacity to forgive. Twist number 12. Eddie Brock willingly merges with Venom again. Eddie Brock's downfall began with humiliation and a desire for revenge. After Peter exposes his fake photo, Eddie loses his job, and from that humiliation onward, his anger toward Peter keeps growing. When Venom eventually merges with his body, Eddie doesn't just fall victim to a parasite, he himself embraces that power as a weapon of revenge. In the final battle, when Peter uses the intense sound of the bell to separate Venom from Eddie's body, an opportunity actually opens up for Eddie. He could have let Venom go and tried to save his own life, because at that point Venom was weakening and separating from his body. But Eddie doesn't do that. Watching Venom fully separate from his body, Eddie realizes that if he loses this parasite, he'll no longer have any superhuman power. The power to take revenge that he'd gained would also vanish in an instant. So, without thinking of his own safety, he deliberately leaps toward Venom and merges with it again. And that exact decision becomes his final mistake. Peter then throws a bomb to destroy Venom. Even though Eddie had a chance to get away just before the explosion, he refused to give up his power. In other words, Eddie's death wasn't just an accident. His own greed, his obsession with revenge, and his refusal to give up that power were also to blame for his death. One thing is very important here. When Venom was influencing Peter, it brought his anger and dark side to the surface. But with Eddie, things become even more terrifying. Because Eddie had already been burning with envy, humiliation, and revenge toward Peter from the start. Venom didn't pull him out of that darkness. It made his worst qualities even stronger instead. In the end, it becomes hard to tell Eddie and Venom apart. Both seem to turn each other's weaknesses into strength. And when the possibility of losing that power arises, Eddie considers even his own life worthless and merges with Venom once again. This is exactly why Eddie's fate isn't just the death of a villain. Even in his final moment, he valued his revenge and thirst for power more than his own life. And that decision is what ultimately destroys him. Twist 313. Gwen Stacy's presence is a big hint toward the future. At first glance, Gwen Stacy's presence in Spider-Man 3 doesn't seem all that important. She seems to be shown as just a side character outside the main story. But looking a little deeper, it's clear that hidden within her small presence is an important hint about Spider-Man's future story. Gwen essentially enters Peter's life at a time when his personal life is gradually growing more complicated. Even though he's with Mary Jane, Peter's growing popularity, his new identity as Spider-Man, and his excessive self-confidence all combine to create a distance in their relationship. It's exactly at this moment that Gwen's arrival makes those problems even more visible. Especially worth remembering is that famous moment when the city holds an event to honor Spider-Man. Gwen was present there too. Amid the crowd's excitement, when Peter kisses Gwen, from the outside it might seem like just another moment of Spider-Man's popularity. But for Mary Jane, it was something else entirely. She realizes Peter is gradually turning into someone who doesn't understand the effect of his own popularity and arrogance. And this is where Gwen's character plays a distinct role in the story. She's not directly Peter's enemy, nor is she fully established as Mary Jane's rival either. But her presence brings the weaknesses in Peter's personal life to the surface. What's even more interesting is that in later Spider-Man stories, Gwen Stacy's character becomes even more important, especially her relationship with Peter Parker. Its emotions and its outcome become one of the most well-known chapters in the Spider-Man story. So looking back at her brief presence in Spider-Man 3, it seems as if the character was slowly being introduced for a bigger story in the future. Although her story isn't taken very deep within this particular film, her presence makes one thing clear to the audience. Peter Parker's life isn't just a story of fighting villains. His personal relationships, love, jealousy, popularity, and wrong decisions are also a big part of his life. In other words, Gwen's character may appear only briefly in this movie, but her presence isn't entirely meaningless. This girl, introduced as just a small side character, would later become tied to an even bigger, more emotional chapter of the Spider-Man story. Twist 314. Jameson's challenge was actually the beginning of Eddie's downfall. When Eddie Brock joins the Daily Bugle office as a new photographer, the biggest problem he faces is competing with Peter. Peter was already well known to Jameson for his Spider-Man photos. So Eddie realizes that just taking good photos won't be enough. He has to do something Peter can't. It's right at this time that Jameson creates a kind of competition between the two photographers. Whoever can bring in a photo of Spider-Man proving some wrongdoing first, the job and the opportunity is basically his. On the surface, this looks like an ordinary office competition. But for Eddie, it gradually becomes a personal battle. Because while Peter was proving his worth by taking real photos, Eddie finds himself under pressure for quick results. He realizes that if he can portray Spider-Man as bad, he can not only get the job, but also secure his position at the paper. And it's exactly this greed that forces him into a decision that ends up changing his entire life. Eddie then manipulates a photo to make it look like Spider-Man is involved in some crime. His goal was to prove his worth to Jameson before Peter could. But there's one thing he doesn't realize. To Peter, Spider-Man isn't just a photography subject, but his own identity. So Eddie's fabricated lie doesn't escape Peter's eyes. When Peter proves the photo is actually fake and edited, Eddie's entire constructed story collapses instantly. Jameson loses trust in him, and Eddie loses his job too. But Eddie's downfall doesn't stop here. In fact, it can be said that this was the real beginning of his downfall. After losing his job, the envy Eddie held toward Peter gradually turns into hatred. He starts believing Peter deliberately ruined his life and took everything away from him. Yet the reality was much simpler. Eddie himself had gone down the wrong path. Instead of relying on his own ability, he wanted to win quickly, and in that rush, he chose deception over truth. Jameson's challenge didn't force him to create a fake photo. That decision was Eddie's own. After his job, respect, and career all collapse together, the resentment inside him deepens even further. And it's exactly in this weak state that Venom enters his life. So something that started as a small office competition ultimately reaches a point where Eddie himself becomes one of Spider-Man's most dangerous enemies. In other words, Jameson's challenge didn't directly turn Eddie into Venom, but it was the first important step in the chain of events from which Eddie's envy, deception, humiliation, and revenge all began. Twist number 15. Peter creates his own greatest enemy with his own hands when Venom first merges with Peter's body. Peter doesn't realize how much this parasite will change his life. At first, the black suit gives him extra power and speed, so Peter enjoys it too. But gradually he realizes his personality is changing along with this power. Anger over small things, excessive aggressive behavior, an obsession with revenge. All of it seems to slip beyond his control. Especially during the attack on Flint Marko, Peter realizes he's no longer the same Spider-Man. The person who would normally stop criminals and hand them over to the police is now, out of anger, trying to finish Flint off. He understands his own transformation even more clearly after mistreating Mary Jane. So in the end, Peter decides that no matter what, he has to get this parasite out of his body. He goes to a church and uses the intense sound of the bell to separate Venom from his body. From the outside, it looks like Peter has finally freed himself from his greatest danger. But this is exactly where the story takes a terrifying turn. Just as Peter is separating Venom from his body, Eddie Brock, standing below, comes into contact with the parasite. And in an instant, Venom merges with Eddie's body. Here's the most important part. Peter himself didn't destroy Venom. He only removed it from his own body. And as a result of that decision, Venom ends up in the body of a man who was already furious with Peter. Eddie had by then lost his job, lost his respect, and holds Peter responsible for his misfortune. When his built-up jealousy and thirst for revenge combine with Venom's superhuman power, it gives birth to an enemy who wants to destroy Peter on a personal level. In other words, Peter had thought that simply removing Venom from himself would end the danger. But in reality, he had just moved the danger from his own body into someone else's hands. And the biggest thing is, if Eddie had never come into contact with Venom, that terrifying enemy at the end of the film might never have been created at all. One of Peter's good decisions, freeing himself from Venom's influence, unknowingly turns into the cause of his greatest danger. In the end, then, Venom isn't just a villain. It's a new danger created by Peter's own decision. In trying to free himself from the darkness, Peter unknowingly made that very darkness even stronger and set it up right in front of him. Twist number 16. Aunt May's ring repeatedly becomes a symbol of Peter's failure, the E. Ring Aunt May gives him looks like a very ordinary object, but in the story of Spider-Man 3, it carries a deep emotional meaning. Because it isn't just a ring. It carries the memory of the love between Peter and his aunt and uncle. When Aunt May hands Peter the ring and tells him Ben once used this very ring to propose to her, she's essentially giving Peter the courage to do the same, to make the person he loves his life partner. Peter then decides to propose to Mary Jane, too. He feels that despite all of life's troubles, he can at least start a beautiful future with Mary Jane by his side. So that old ring becomes the symbol of his love. But the plan falls apart the very first time. Just as Peter is preparing to propose to Mary Jane, Gwen shows up. Things get even worse when Gwen brings up that photo of her kiss with Spider-Man. Mary Jane takes the whole thing the wrong way and, deeply hurt, leaves. The ring stays with Peter, but the proposal never happens. Even so, Peter doesn't give up. He plans to propose to Mary Jane again, but this time, the misunderstandings built up in their relationship run even deeper. Harry secretly threatens Mary Jane and forces her to leave Peter. As a result, when Peter believes Mary Jane has fallen for someone else, his hope for a second proposal shatters too. This is where the ring's symbolic importance becomes even clearer. At first it was a symbol of love and a new life, but circumstances keep changing so much that the same ring ends up bearing witness to Peter's unfulfilled wishes and failures. Even more interesting, the ring also highlights a big contradiction in Peter's life. As Spider-Man, he's able to save countless people in the city and stop criminals, but he can't properly manage his own personal life. Even with the power to protect the world, he can't escape the fear of losing the person he loves. In the end, after Harry dies, when Peter and Mary Jane come back to each other, their relationship becomes more important than the ring itself. Because Peter realizes that love doesn't depend on just a proposal or a ring. Rather, a relationship survives on trust, forgiveness, and understanding each other. So, looking at Aunt May's little ring throughout the whole movie, it feels like a symbol of the balance Peter's life keeps losing. Every time he tries to put his life in order, that plan falls apart for one reason or another. Twist number 17. Harry's butler was the only witness to the entire truth throughout the movie. One thing kept circling in Harry's mind, that Peter Parker was responsible for his father Norman Osborn's death. This belief gradually turned Harry's friendship into hatred. But the interesting thing is, the truth Harry spent years fighting Peter to find out was actually hidden right inside his own house. Harry's old butler had seen everything with his own eyes. He knew exactly how Norman died from the impact of his own glider while attacking Spider-Man. In other words, the entire foundation of Harry's years of revenge was based on a mistaken belief. But the problem was, the butler hadn't told Harry the truth for all this time. As a result, Harry spends years believing Peter is his father's killer. Even when he hears the truth from Peter himself, he doesn't believe it. Because to him, Peter was someone who could say anything to cover up his own crime. Finally, when Harry reaches the peak of his revenge, it's the butler who tells him the whole truth. He makes it clear Peter wasn't responsible for Norman's death. Norman died from being struck by his own glider. After learning this one truth, Harry's entire world turns upside down. The man he'd considered his enemy all this time is actually innocent. And the revenge for which he destroyed his own friendship, his relationships, everything, had no foundation at all. The biggest thing here is that the solution to such a huge mystery in the movie doesn't come from any scientist, police officer, or superhero. It comes from an ordinary person that almost no one in the story considers important at the start. And this is exactly why Harry's butler's character becomes strangely important to the story. The person who knew the most was the one who stayed silent all this time. And because of that silence, Harry spent years hating the wrong person. In the end, the truth comes out exactly when Harry is about to make the biggest decision of his life. So, this piece of information isn't just the solution to a mystery. It's what turns Harry's character around and opens the path for him to stand by Peter's side again. Friends, so far, we've discussed some of this movie's hidden twists with you. Now we'll go over some reviews of this movie with you, which we're taking from Wikipedia. We mentioned earlier that this Spider-Man movie was made after the previous two sequels, and it's the third sequel, Spider-Man 3, Cough. And it was made as a sequel because of the massive popularity among audiences. And it's also a superhero movie based on the Marvel Comics character Spider-Man. It was directed by Sam Raimi, and the screenplay was written by three people: Sam Raimi, Ivan Raimi, and Alvin Sargent. The story was written by two people, Sam Raimi and Ivan Raimi. It was produced by Laura Ziskin, Avi Arad, and Grant Curtis. As for the cast, it starred Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, James Franco, Thomas Hayden Church, Topher Grace, Bryce Dallas Howard, James Cromwell, Rosemary Harris, J.K. Simmons, along with many other wonderful actors and actresses. The cinematography was done by Bill Pope, and it was edited by Bob Murawski. The music was composed by Christopher Young, and it was produced by Columbia Pictures. And it was distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. Its release date was initially April 16, 2007, when it first premiered at Roppongi Hills Maury Tower, and it was finally released in the United States on May 4, 2007. The running time was 148 minutes. Its budget was $258 million, and at the box office it earned over $895 million. In other words, it had incredible popularity among audiences. Friends, today we're wrapping up the explanation of this movie here. Do let us know in the comments which movie you'd like to see next. And don't forget to tell us in the comments how you liked this movie. Until the next movie, take care of yourselves. Goodbye.